In my last video, I argued that vegans should be anti-natalists if they are committed to reducing harm as much as possible. And I just want to add a few more thoughts on this topic. I've been watching a lot of different vegan channels over the past months, and occasionally this topic is brought up, and of course they don't deal with any of the arguments that I've made in my video, and they are probably not even aware of that video, or they just don't care about those arguments because they're not convenient to deal with. But one of the arguments that they make a lot, because they go back and forth about, as if the only argument against having children was based on overpopulation, which it's not. It's just one of the arguments, and it's basically the easiest one to see and to embrace, but it's really not the only one. Anyway, it seems to be the only one that vegans want to deal with on YouTube. And so they created these counter arguments to this and saying, the population is a problem, but it's not going to solve it if we stop having children, because we're not the ones who are overpopulating the earth. It's the third world countries, and they go through a bunch of excuses, essentially, to support vegans procreating. And the main one that's been coming up in those videos is this idea that somehow, because you're a vegan parent, you're going to create vegan children, and they will the likelihood of them contributing to changing the world is high enough to warrant having them. So basically, you have children with an agenda. You don't have children because you want to love your child, no matter who they turn out to be. You have a child with this in mind, that they will further your cause, which I agree is a good cause. I'm not bashing the cause. I am against animal torture and exploitation as much as possible. But there is a big problem when you justify procreation only through this lens that you're creating a vegan, because you're not creating a vegan. So not only do you want to use someone as a means to an end, rather than recognizing that a person is always an end in themselves, but you're also wrong to imagine that you can actually use your children as means to an end, because at some point you will lose control over them. Anyway, if vegans think that they have a lot of work ahead of them in order to change minds, they have no idea how much anti-natalists have on their plates. Because some of these vegans are, by all evidence, pretty intelligent people, yet they show a complete lack of logic and understanding on this topic. Like Mick the Vegan, who makes some pretty good videos on veganism, really sucks on the topic of procreation. And for the rest of the video, I'm just going to read my latest comment exchange with Mick the Vegan. And I'm going to abstain from commenting on the things that I read, because otherwise this video is going to be way too long. This vegans having kids issue cannot be looked at linearly in terms of negative impact. Every vegan pregnancy shatters paradigms. Every vegan today is contributing toward a tipping point. If every single vegan woman in the world popped a baby out tomorrow, it would only increase our footprint on this planet by a fraction of a percent. But the potential of vegan children to change the world is worth way more than the risk. The vegan movement is not a sterility movement. There's a massive gap in that logic. If this, quotes, tipping point and, quotes, paradigm shifting necessarily apply to your ideology, then it can apply to every other ideology which can compete with yours. How can you demonstrate with evidence that this is different from a Christian family bringing up Christian children to help them share the gospel of Jesus? How can you prove that it's not the Islamics who are on their way to a tipping point and who will convert most of the population? You can't, because it's by definition wishful thinking. It's also wishful thinking to believe you can create an army that will fight for you because they have your DNA. You don't have control over another consciousness. Even if it shares half of your genes and you spend 18 years being responsible for them and conditioning them to have your values, it's easy enough to see in the world every day if you don't have blinkers on. Secondly, even if I grant that everything you said is true, and true only about veganism somehow, then this would mean that you have a moral imperative to procreate as much as possible. Every ejaculation that doesn't lead to conception is essentially immoral under this belief. Since I don't see you going around trying to impregnate as many vegan women as possible, I think you'd probably agree with me that this is absolutely ridiculous. The ideology of veganism is miles away from theology. First of all, there are facts that support veganism, such as being Christian or Muslim is not the single best thing you can personally do to contribute less to environmental destruction, especially as climate change gets worse. Here is an indication of a paradigm shift that I think is relevant. The word vegan just surpassed the word Christ in terms of Google search popularity. Secondly, there are very influential children of vegan or plant-based people, such as XYZ. Not only do they create documentaries that reach millions, but they also show how a few can do a lot. Enough to offset vegan children that go off the wagon. In the end, I'm not trying to breed an army, just trying to keep vegans from being pressured into not reproducing at all. Point 2. Yes, it is ridiculous to stretch my position to say that it would be my moral imperative to procreate a ton. This is all merely a response to, quotes, don't reproduce at all, as Freelee and Durianrider are pushing. I could stretch that opposing position, which I assume you hold, and say that we should all commit suicide to lower our impact. Moot point. Would you agree that there are more influential vegans who weren't always vegans and didn't have vegan parents than there are influential vegans who are lifelong vegans who had vegan parents? It seems obvious that this is the case. If you agree, then this means that we don't need to breed in order for veganism not to die off. Vegans can grow as a group and, quotes, shatter paradigms without any issues, without having to pop out more babies. There's also a glaring assumption in your post. The assumption is that because veganism has a lot to stand on, this makes it more likely to catch on and to win against competing ideologies and philosophies. I agree with you that there are more valid reasons to be a vegan than to be religious, but there is no reason to believe that, as such, it will automatically lead to the desired behavioral outcome. There is no basis for this assumption. Falsehood and ignorance demonstrably triumphs in the mind of most individuals within every society, not the truth, nor moral uprightness. Isn't this obvious? It's why there's so few of us who live on a plant-based diet in the Western world, despite their proven benefits, both for our health and ethical reasons. Human pettiness and ignorance is still the rule, and there is no sign of this being flipped on its head anytime soon or ever. The truth is not appealing and accessible to everyone, and those who are attracted to the truth will find it. Quotes, vegan genetics and parental conditioning cannot be the answer. Have a quick look at history. Did the greatest philosophers become the greatest because their parents were also great philosophers? What about artists? Do we owe Van Gogh's paintings to the brilliance of his parents? What about Shakespeare's plays? The fact that the word vegan is being searched for more than the word Christ at this point in time is not indicative of a paradigm shift, but of a trend. Trends, unlike paradigm shifts, do not lead to improvements, let alone permanent ones, and they can die out. Another important thing to understand is that societies do not progress morally in a linear way. Moral progress of any kind is always subject to collapse. Just like we can see vegans reverting back to omnivorous eating patterns on an individual basis, at an alarmingly high rate, by the way, we can see examples of such regression on a societal level, like it was the case with Nazism and Abu Ghraib. A well-informed vegan should keep this in mind and not fall prey to their own optimism bias. Both possible outcomes of this vegan pronatalist view are morally problematic. You either impose a tremendous burden on someone who couldn't consent to it and use them as a means to an end, or you end up with more blood on your hands by having created just another average consumer exploiter who didn't accept this burden. As for your argument stretching my position, there is one big problem. When I stretch your position to demonstrate that you have a moral imperative, it is because it logically leads to the best case scenario for your desired outcome according to your own arguments. When you stretch my position, it doesn't lead to a moral imperative because committing suicide is not the best case scenario for me. It also asks for an impossibility. This kind of intellectual altruism has no power over one's will to live. Your representation of my position takes it as a given that I could only have a negative impact, and that therefore suicide would be better since I would prevent a more negative one. But I've never claimed that I believe that I and others can only have a negative impact. Just like you, I believe the best case scenario is to have a net positive impact. So killing myself is not the answer, unless it's impossible for me to physically pursue my desired outcome. Not creating a new consciousness, on the other hand, is perfectly in line with this desire. Oh, and life is not a gift either. Give up that argument.